Well, hello, amazing, gorgeous you. Welcome to the Whole Life Podcast Show. Have you had trauma in your life, especially in your childhood? And do you find that it's impacting your relationships? Yes. We are going to talk about that today. We're going to give you real help in your intimate relationships and help you with these trauma wounds. I love you, and I'll see you at the end of the show. Well, hello, amazing, gorgeous you. I am so excited to have you today on the Whole Life Podcast. And we have a special guest who has been with us before in a couple different ways. We have Dr. Juli Slattery, and she is amazing. She actually has an amazing backstory, and she's an amazing ministry of helping marriages to heal, helping marriages to be strong. Welcome to the podcast, and welcome back to my platform, Dr. Slattery.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dr. Barbara. It's good to be with you.
Yes. All right. So you have a new book out. It's so exciting because your previous content has just helped us all in so many ways. Can you tell us about your new book?
Yeah, so this new book is actually a new old book. It's a total rewrite of my very first book that I wrote over 20 years ago. It's called Finding the Hero in Your Husband. And really the theme of it is, how do we as women use our power in a way that builds intimacy in marriage rather than sabotaging it, which I think is more natural for us to do. So it kind of grapples with that. And when I first wrote the book 20 years ago, I was a young wife trying to figure it out, and have returned to some of those principles and rewritten them just for the modern day.
I love it. Well, you know what? I love all things trauma in the sense that healing trauma.
Yes.
And I myself came out of tremendous trauma, and I've been through failed marriage and am now happily married. But so I would love to, what I really want to talk about with you is how childhood abuse impacts our current marriage or love relationship. So can you talk to us about your findings here, what you know about like the research or the word and that combination, and what your experiences have been?
Yeah. So a lot of it is when you understand relational dynamics, particularly relational intimacy, you look at an intimate relationship being when you're meeting each other's deepest needs. And so intimacy is when I can be myself, I can expose what I need to my partner, and my partner is going to make his best effort to meet those needs instead of exploiting them. And so healthy marriages are when both people feel safe enough to kind of say, here's what I need to feel connected. And then the other person is responding with, well, I love you. I want to give you that, whatever it might be. So whenever there is trauma, particularly childhood trauma, that's going to interrupt that whole interaction. And that, first of all, we probably have less awareness of what we actually need, because with childhood trauma, you're kind of learning to shut down some of those basic attachment needs of, I need to feel safe and I need to feel connected. And instead, it becomes more about, how do I manage my environment? And so somebody that's been through childhood trauma is probably going to have less of a sense of, not only do I feel these needs, but I have the right to articulate them. So that would be a first kind of difference that it would make. And I think, second of all, a lot of what I talk about in the book, Finding the Hero in Your Husband, is what do you do with your relational power? And so your partner's needs give you power. Am I going to meet those needs? Am I going to use that power to exploit or to manipulate and get what I want? And when we have trauma from the past, and all of us do this to some extent, we use our relational power to stay safe instead of using our relational power to meet the other person's needs. And all of us are guilty of this to some extent. And you can relate to it when you're like, okay, I really want my husband to play with the kids more. So instead of asking him to do that, I'm going to be manipulative. I'm going to maybe pout when he doesn't. Or I'm going to make snide comments that make him feel like, hey, you better man up or else. So those aren't really healthy ways of using our power or inviting the other person into intimacy. They become more manipulative. And again, we all do this because all of us at some level have experienced disappointment and trauma. But when there's been significant childhood trauma, you're going to be more likely to use any relational power you have to stay safe instead of building intimacy.
Yes, that's true. But the research also says that you don't have to have all your childhood wounds healed to have a successful relationship.
Right.
In fact, you can learn all kinds of really wonderful relationship skills. And I think that's beautiful. Because sometimes I'll have clients come in and they'll say, oh, well, I'm not ready for a relationship because I need to have all this healed first. Well, we actually heal in well, first, that can be true from time to time. Sometimes we need to take a reprieve if there's a lot of stuff coming up. But when we're living in a perpetual, oh, I have to wait until I'm healed before I can really connect. Well, we actually need to heal together. A relationship is, we in a relationship, he has triggers, she has triggers, and together they have this beautiful environment where they're both empathetic and minister to one another in a way that the other can receive, kind of understanding that other person of what they are needing. And that is actually how we heal.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful thing. Trauma takes place in a relationship. And so if our wounds are usually formed in relationship, that even just makes sense that our healing would also be formed in relationship. And so that's so true. And I know this has been your experience as well as mine, that I'd rather have two people that have had significant trauma who are really wanting and to work on their relationship than people who had, relatively healthy childhoods that are like, oh, we're good. We don't really need to learn to communicate. And sometimes it's the very fact that we're feeling pain or we're feeling disconnected because of past circumstances that we're actually more open to understanding how we relate and how we maybe are missing each other in communication. And so people that have been through trauma are often the best students of how do I do this well? I don't want to do it the way I learned growing up. And so you're absolutely right that it certainly isn't a determinant, like you can't have a good relationship.
I love it. I went through a lot of trauma and I've seen so many women healed through or who are in the process of healing through the Hearts Returning Home method, which is a method of trauma healing. And often when we grow up in those adult child of whatever, alcoholic, hoarding, mental illness, families, et cetera, we feel like we feel like we're on a stage and everyone got the script except us. And we spend our lives looking for the script of how to people. And, it's like I felt that way for so long. And so it is true. You get hungry if you use that hunger in the right way, hunger for the Lord, hunger to get whole, then we can become really excellent students. We just have to have some humility because we are going to have to make some changes.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm one generation removed from that, Dr. Barbara, because my parents both grew up with a lot of trauma and they got married, like determined, hey, we're going to have a great marriage. Didn't have the skills to do that. And their marriage kind of got shipwrecked, like right around the time when I was born. And that was when they found a relationship with God. They sought counseling. They started learning what healthy relationships are meant to be. And they worked really hard on their marriage. They worked really hard on how they were parenting. And so I feel like I got the fruit of that, of a relatively stable childhood, because they determined that we don't want to repeat what we grew up with. And so absolutely, there's that hunger to learn and change. And I think even with people that haven't experienced significant trauma, like we have to be challenged not to be complacent. Like we still have blind spots and selfishness and wounds of our own that might not be defined as trauma. And sometimes it's those people that aren't willing to work on the relationship when they need to.
Another thing that can happen, that is beautiful. Another thing that can happen when we've had trauma is that one of two things can happen when we have unhealed trauma is that rather than attach to people, we can attach and create attachments to objects of addiction. So that can help it happen. Or we can grow up and marry or couple with someone who's unavailable and has an attachment to an addiction, because underneath addiction is usually trauma and attachment difficulties.
Right.
Can you speak to those third parties that sometimes are in the marriage for those that have a trauma history?
Yeah, I think just identifying that is huge, because if you don't name it, you think there's something wrong with me. And there's so many people that are in a marriage with somebody who's struggling with an addiction, who's struggling with a mental health issue, and they're reading the marriage books and they're saying, it's not working. What's wrong with me? It must be that I'm not loving enough, or it must be that I'm not enough for this person sexually, or whatever might be the issue. And so I think for people in that situation, like having the light bulb go off and say, you know what, this actually has nothing to do with me. I could be the best husband or wife in the world, and I can't heal this person. That in and of itself can be just this freeing of, okay, here's what my role is, but there's also a boundary to that role. And my husband or wife really needs to get help to deal with the wounds from the past, to deal with current behaviors that are getting in the way of us being able to have a healthy relationship.
It feels so personal, though, especially when there's an addiction to pornography or when someone's had an affair. And I just went to another Gottman marriage training, and so I've kind of got all those stats on my mind. It's so interesting. Only 7 to 9% of people who have affairs actually remain in relationships with the people they have affairs with. So.
Wow.
And when we think about affairs, that's a whole another kind of trauma that can happen in the relationship. Can you speak to that piece and healing from that piece in the couplehood?
Yeah. We're learning a lot, as you know, about betrayal trauma, that it's not just trauma that takes place in our childhood, but in existing relationships. Now in real time, we can experience new traumas that make us feel like we can't trust our partner. We can't trust ourselves. Somehow I missed the red flags. It creates all kinds of doubts of, can I ever be enough? Can I ever trust again? And what we're learning about recovering from that kind of trauma is it's not a communication issue. You can't go to your typical marriage counselor and say, help put our marriage back together. There's significant work that needs to be done on both sides of that equation. First, for the person that has betrayed, whether through infidelity or through continual pornography use. Why is that happening? Is there addiction? What are the wounds underneath that? Do they really understand that the pain that they're causing within their marriage relationship? And then on the side of the person that has been the victim of that infidelity, just the wounds. It's not you just need to forgive this person and move on. It's something significant has been taken and lost, and trust in the relationship has been decimated. And so, I think people that are working with couples that are going through this kind of betrayal would say that for most couples, it's going to take at least 2 years of intensive work to get to the place where they can begin rebuilding the groundwork of trust and then start to build steps of intimacy. And I think, counselors and pastors who aren't used to that kind of work just want to get to the rebuilding intimacy without realizing that the whole foundation has been cracked and needs to be examined and really reestablished.
Absolutely. And we don't, another thing is when there's abuse that's ongoing, we don't protect the institution of marriage over the people in the marriage. And when there's ongoing abuse, we recommend that you immediately get safe and get out of that situation.
Yeah. And I would say that's not even protecting the institution of marriage. That's not marriage. When one person is using their relational power to wound the other person over and over again. So I think we have to recognize that you're not doing anybody any good by pretending that this is what God intended for marriage.
Yes. And Proverbs actually talks quite a bit about setting boundaries with angry
Mm-hmm.
people and those people who are in those perpetual kind of characterological kind of patterns. And so, we got to read the whole Bible on that.
Yes.
I would
Yeah.
love to talk about empathy because we know that there's so much research on empathy and the power of empathy, that the masters in relationship really use a lot of empathy. But when we've been through trauma, we either can morph into the other person too much and neglect our own needs and not represent our own needs and be like a false sense of empathy that is actually like a compulsive fixing as a trauma response, fixing, helping, pleasing, appeasing. Or it can be where it's hard to be empathetic because we're so hurt, it's hard to come out of ourselves and see the other person's point of view. And for many folks, they kind of go back and forth between those two. Can you talk about the role of empathy and how to move towards empathy?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're more of an expert on some of these things than I am. You're so up on the research and the latest techniques. I would just say that, going back to a key piece of intimacy and relationship is recognizing the needs in the other person.
Yeah.
And as far as it depends on you, meeting those needs. And so that in and of itself requires empathy because, hey, my husband's emotional needs are very different from mine. And early in marriage, I would try to meet his needs by meeting them the way I thought they should, like, hey, he's like me, So if I need words of affirmation, that's how I'm going to encourage him. Instead of being able to get out of my own situation and saying, he's a completely different person with a completely different personality, with different drives and desires and different experiences. And if I'm going to give him an emotional gift, it's probably not going to be the same emotional gift that I would appreciate. And so empathy is such a basic building block of intimacy. If you don't have empathy, you can't be intimate. You can be cooperative, you can have a good friendship, but intimacy requires that I'm available enough to really understand the needs of somebody who's different from me and to feel compassion for that need. And so some of the work that you're talking about doing of getting to the place of empathy, again, is sort of a forerunner of what it means to begin developing intimacy in relationship.
I love it. I love it. And we do know, by the way, that your attachment system can heal. So if you followed me for any length of time, I talk a lot about it, insecure attachment, secure attachment, and the different kinds of insecure attachment. But we know that attachment can heal. And especially if the more we have securely attached people around us, we can also heal the attachment system in our relationship by getting to know, as Dr. Slattery is saying, getting to know the inner world of our significant other so that we can meet their wants and needs. And I do want to give like a little free tool here that I just learned about. So there's the Gottman Card Decks app for couples where you can basically use these cards to build your internal love map of each other in a couplehood and to know each other. And that helps that helps us to become a master of love in our love relationships. Yeah. All right. Now, for those of us who are wives, who are married, I would love for you to give us maybe 5 tips from your book on being our husband's hero. And I would love for you to give maybe some of the more unique or, the ones we haven't heard of as much.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So maybe if I can even unpack one that we hear all the time, but I don't think we really understand.
Okay.
So if you go to any Christian marriage counselor or retreat, what do you think they're going to say is a husband's number one need?
Sex.
Okay, so that would be one of them. So we can talk about that one first. What would be another one that would always come up?
Respect.
Right. Okay. So those are the 2 issues that wives continually hear, particularly within the Christian environment, that your husbands need. And we kind of roll our eyes at both of them because I don't think we really understand either of them. Why don't we talk about respect first, and then we'll talk about sex. So I think when wives hear that your husband needs respect, especially the way this has been taught traditionally, is, oh, he needs you to no matter what, not question him or undermine him. And again, we're kind of like, what's the deal with that? What if I don't feel respect for my husband? What if he hasn't earned my respect? But I think something that I learned early on in marriage that really helped me understand this is that most men are constantly battling a fear of insecurity. Like they're afraid of failing.
Yes.
And competence is a huge theme in most guys' life. If I'm playing a sport, am I the one that you can count on to hit the home run in the ninth inning, or am I going to strike out? And you see this theme played out in movies and stories that men are drawn to. He's the hero with flaws that overcomes his weakness. And so what I want women to understand is, like, women wake up every day with sort of this unconscious question of, do you still love me? Are you going to still be there? We fear rejection or abandonment more. Men wake up with the question, do you still believe in me? Like, am I your hero? Even though you know all the ways that I've failed. And I think that this is so key for us as wives to understand, that when we talk about respecting our husbands, it's really speaking to this need of, you mentioned Proverbs 14:1 says, the wise woman builds her house, but with their own hands, the foolish one tears hers down. And when I really think about that proverb that was written thousands of years ago, when women in society had like no power, it spoke to the power that they had in the home life and intimate relationships. And you and I know that women have the power to say a few words and just cut their husbands down and humiliate them and expose their weaknesses. And so the thing that I've learned to ask all the time is, am I using my words and my relational power in a way that my husband feels like I believe in him? And sometimes I say things or don't say things just out of being busy or being frustrated. And it tears down that intimacy because my husband feels like I'm competing with him or I'm critical of him. So I would say that's one of the core things. And there's lots of areas that can play out. Like, how do you navigate jobs together? And how do you navigate parenting? And, how he does things so differently than you do. But I think that's the most important thing that I think we need to return to as women, is understanding that. So I'll take a breath and let you respond to that.
I love that. And I think that's a great point for us to begin to wrap up on, because it's so true. I mean, I've done therapy with men and women, and women tend to, it's the 80-20 rule, but we tend to think men are much stronger than what they are. And at least in Western society, men are not allowed to be as weak or share their emotion. And so they don't have very many places to go with it. And we do not understand how much power we have in our mouth.
Yeah.
And also to make for like when we're married, to have him feel wanted too. We put this pressure on the man to be this pursuer, but men actually need a lot of flirts and signals, yes, before they're going to pursue us, because they want to know it's safe, because they don't want to feel like that failure. They don't want to pursue and be rejected. So I love that there's a lot there. Is there another point you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think along with that need for just encouragement, respect for you to believe in him, men need help. And, I think that this is like, I think about these needs like two wings of an airplane. And if one's out of balance, then you're not going to have a healthy marriage. And there are some women that understand this need, like they need my input, my insight, my opinion. They need accountability from their wives. And we get that part, and we're constantly trying to help and change him. And that's out of balance. But if you put it in, okay, the respect thing allows you then to be a trusted teammate and to bring up an issue when it needs to be discussed. And I think particularly within religious circles and the Christian world, we have not understood this well. I think we've presented the role of a wife as only respect. and not said, no, actually, God said himself that men are not okay or complete when they're alone, that they need this other person, this woman, to bring a different perspective and to bring an element of accountability. Mm-hmm. And it's so critical, Dr. Barbara, because this is where we get into abusive relationships. When women understand, okay, my husband's got a sort of a fragile ego and I can't question him. And they don't realize that, no, actually, he needs your input and he needs you to set boundaries and he needs you to stand up for what's right. And so really being a godly wife is holding those two things in tension, of not having a critical and competitive spirit, but at the same time realizing that your husband needs you to bring your strength. And sometimes that means having hard conversations.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. I love that. So true. I mean, when God made woman, he called her Azir, which is the same woman. I mean, the same word that he used to describe himself. Like when we say, where's my help comes from? My help comes from the Lord. That's the same word as Azir, as woman. And so we are a mighty, mighty help. I love too this idea of making sure we're an ally when our partner is venting and then coming back later. Like when someone's really venting and really emotional, it's time to be an ally. Yeah, I feel that. I get that. Oh my gosh. That's not the time probably to say, hey, check yourself right here.
Right. Yeah.
But then to wrap back around. This is just wonderful. Such good information. And I love kind of the meeting of the minds here and bringing us together to talk about this through a trauma lens. And we just want to encourage you that you guys can do this, that you can honor yourselves and honor your significant other in your love relationship. Well, where can we find out more, Dr. Juli Slattery?
Yeah. Well, you could find that book, Finding the Hero in Your Husband, at pretty much any online bookseller. Our resources are all found at AuthenticIntimacy.com. And we have a weekly podcast there that you can plug into. There's online book studies with this book and many others and other resources that might be helpful.
Well, thank you. You know, sex and marriage is a big area where we need help as Christian women, and especially those of us who've been through trauma. And so thank you so much for being on the Whole Life Podcast show. It's been so good to spend time with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Ooh, I always love talking with Dr. Juli Slattery. She is an amazing blessing in how she is helping men and women with intimacy and connection. Are you wanting more wholeness in your life? Are you thinking, gosh, my trauma wounds are really impacting my relationships and I want to learn how to heal. I want to learn how to move forward in wholeness. Well, I really want to encourage you to go to drbarbareau.com/book a call and book a call with one of our team members, and we can work with you on a personalized wholeness plan. We do all this because we love you. Make sure you're on my email list at drbarbareau.com/contact, and check me out on Instagram and Facebook. And I just started making videos on TikTok, so you can check me out there, Dr. Barbareau. I love you, and I will see you in all the usual places. Mwah.